All right, so now that we have our retopology done, we're ready to come in here and start the UV process. Now, to kick things off, what I am going to do is kind of cut our initial UVs here and then lay them out. Depending on how we want to approach this, we may even want to delete the character in some ways right now and prepare it for mirroring. So it kind of depends on where we want to mirror, why we want to mirror, all that kind of good stuff. There's a lot of areas we can mirror. We can go straight down the body. That's very common for games, and even the helmet here. So what I often do is I'll go ahead and turn off Make Live because we don't need that anymore. I'll delete half of the character all the way down on each of these structures on the line of symmetry, and we'll just lay out UVs for one side, and then we'll mirror over it later. This is very common for games. Now, one of the things I might want to do is just make sure everything's turned off. I'm currently isolated here. So I do have my retopo base here. I'm going to just put that on a layer and hide it. That way we're not looking at that, and continue this process here, just deleting half of our model. It doesn't really matter which side you go down in terms of the symmetry line. The most important thing is that we have symmetry, so we can actually do this. And if you follow along to our retopology process, then you should already have that. So no problem. We'll just delete, one half of these, and then we can just focus on the one half we actually need UVs, and we can mirror those over. Okay, so once we have that in place, we're ready to start working. I'm going to come up here to Windows, Workspace, and UV Editing. I work in this space when I'm teaching, but generally speaking, I just do a Windows and come in here to our modeling editors and UV Editor and float this in the general editor when I'm working professionally. But since I'm only recording one monitor, hey, you can see what we're doing here. Now, the next step is just get base UVs on all these, and these are going to have a whole hot mess of UVs. The way we do that is we just select this, we come in here to create, and we just do a projection-based UV here on camera-based. So we'll do camera-based, project the whole helmet, then I can come down here to the body, we can go ahead and do the same thing, create camera-based. Then we'll come into the shoulders here, we'll go ahead and create camera-based, come down here to the legs, go ahead and create camera-based, and then do the same thing for the kneecap, and this will give us our base here. Now, when laying out UVs, there's really kind of a basic rule I like to follow, and that's kind of the clothing rule. So let's go ahead and start with the torso here, so we can kind of talk about how that's going to go. We're going to essentially cut along clothing lines. Now, the first thing that's obvious with our body here is we're going to cut this into chunks. So the first chunk I'm going to cut off here is my hand, and we're just going to make this its own separate little chunk. And then we'll do the sleeve, the torso, so on and so forth. So I'm going to just select these in Edge Mode, come up here to cut that out. Then in face mode or UV mode, you can double click over here and just move it off to the side. This will allow us to organize our chunks, and then we can unfold them accordingly. Some of these you should be able to just double click and do a cut on, and you'll see that'll cut out my sleeve here. And then we can come up to this area here. We can cut along the neckline. Looks like our double click's not going to work there because we use some triangles. So we can go ahead and cut that. That'll separate out the head. And then when it comes to the torso here, we could do some cut lines on the belt buckle. This is going to be an area that we actually may need to play around with hard edges with, believe it or not. But we'll cut along there. And then I'm also going to cut along the belt line to separate this out. We'll just cut there. And that's going to separate out the body, relatively nicely. At this point, with the body selected, you can actually do a modify, unfold, and just make sure you're using unfold 3D. It's the default in Maya now, but sometimes it turns off. And you'll see our base layers here. Now, some of these we're good to go with. The head, we probably don't need to adjust at all. This we absolutely do. The sleeve we do. You can see here with the torso, this is probably fine. I don't think we need further adjustments. On this area, we do need to make one adjustment, and that's coming in here and cutting this ring. That represents the torso separation, so we'll cut that out. The belt here looks great, and then the buckle here we're going to need to adjust. So we can go ahead and run and unfold on this again. Just kind of unfold these out here. That way this area here is good. There is one more exception here. We don't need the front and back to be the same. We actually want those to be separate. So the center line I placed down here, we're going to use that to cut. And that's going to make it so on the interior here, we can make that less detailed. We can just unfold that. All right, so let's go ahead and break down some of these other complex areas like the sleeve here. With the sleeve, if you feel around your own sleeve, you'll find a seam either towards the back or sometimes the bottom underneath. For game characters, we generally like to put it on the bottom. That way, if there's any weird UV seam issues, they're going to happen here and not elsewhere. So I'll just come along here and we'll just find that bottom area and hit cut. And then we can just unfold this area specifically by selecting it in face mode and doing modify unfold. But that's going to be good for our arm there. Don't need to make any adjustment. On our hand, we've already discussed some of the changes we're going to make. One of the things we need to do is cut off the metallic bangle here. So we're just going to cut that into its own ring. And then with this, we have to think about how this is going to go. If this needs to sit at a 90-degree angle, we'd essentially want each of these to be cut, but this looks like it has enough rounding where we don't have to. We do, however, need a bottom line here. So I'm going to cut this baseline here. And unfortunately, I didn't kind of maintain the symmetry there, so I think I should have, but we didn't. But we'll go ahead and cut that, and that should allow this ring to unfold here into a nice ring that we can utilize. So that should be okay. I may need to adjust that. It's very wobbly. And then when it comes to the hand, if you remember, I mentioned we set a line down the middle here. So if I double click this here, we should be able to kind of select these, actually this line here, running across the finger. So I am going to have to kind of work my way around the shift double clicking a few times since we did put triangles along these edges. But this should give me a clear front and back of the hand to create that glove-like structure. And because we planned it in our retopology pass, it should, in theory, work out nicely here. Now, I'm not going to double click here. I am just going to single click out to the edge. And then when it comes to the thumb, we can go ahead and figure out the angle here this is going to set out. So remember, it kind of twists, and then it comes down here and under, and I'm just going to cut that out to this point here. Don't double click on accident like I did. We'll go ahead and hit cut. And if we go ahead and grab this very strange convoluted area and we unfold this, we should get a front and a back of our 3-finger glove here. That looks nice, like so. Now here we can choose an area to weld together, and usually the safest is this area, plus this is probably the best because the thumb is going underneath it, so we don't really see that. So we could come into the side area here. You could do a cut, move, and sew, and I'll move and sew and unfold these as I go, but you'll see how those nicely sit together. And this will give us one less seam. Now, seams are important because it makes texturing easier, especially if you don't have something like Substance Painter, which is going to let you paint across. But it's also important for draw calls because each UV island is a separate draw call. So if we can have less of those, that's even better. Now, the last area to kind of solve for is this guy. And when it comes to this one, you know, generally you're going to have like an interior, exterior type area. Because this does potentially sit at a 90-degree and we might need to harden these edges, we also might just cut the outside edges here. It really depends on if we're going to need that though. If we don't, then we don't want to bother. But just cutting this inside area out of here and doing an unfold on this should be enough to make this usable and not give us any issues. We could potentially cut the corners as well, but with how this is looking, I think this is okay, and it should work for what we need. We may need to adjust that though, so we'll have to think about it. But something like that is going to take care of our torso UVs. Now, I'm not going to worry too much about the layout. You could do an automated layout here, and one thing I do like to check on is under the pre-scaling, just making sure Preserve 3D Ratios is on, and applying that. You could also play around with letting the rotate shells happen currently. Whatever you want to do. I'm going to leave it here for now because we're eventually going to pack the whole character together. And certain areas like the head here, we don't need that much detail on for this character since the head is not important. But that will give us kind of our base there for the torso. So we can delete the history on that. Some areas will be super quick, like the kneecap here. Basically for the kneecap, we just find the edge that turns away, double click that, do a cut on this, and then do a quick unfold. And we could potentially put the cut back here instead on this area, but usually for a wraparound edge on that, you want to find the center volume and cut. So we'll just lay that out. Once again, we'll definitely come back and adjust that. For other areas like the shoulder pauldron, it also is pretty quick. This outer lip you generally are fine with. So what we end up usually doing is finding where it turns away on both sides, front and back, and then you can just perform a cut. This will go ahead and allow this to separate into basically a front to back and 2 strips. So let me go ahead and lay that out so you can see it. like so. And then on the back area, just finding an area to cut. Now, we're less likely to see this seam, so I'm going to cut there. And then if we go ahead and do a layout here, this will give us our base layout here for something like the shoulder. Notice this did not lay out flat. That is a problematic area. We don't want that to stay round, so we might need to play around with coming to the other side and adding a cut to get it into 2 halves, and then repeating the unfold process, like so, and then just do a quick layout here. And we'll do some further optimization on some of these pieces, but let's get the base chunks in here first. The torso is kind of the big one. If we come down here to the foot will be pretty quick too. We have the separation of the boot here, so we're going to cut that. With the legs, they're similar to the pants. You generally have an inner seam, so we can cut here, and that will go ahead and let the pants unfold to a front and back. And if I go ahead and unfold this, you'll see that. Just like with the other ones, we can cut this center circle area. That's just kind of there to help catch light and reduce the verts. So there we go. And you'll see that'll give us kind of a front back to the pants. The boot's a little bit more complicated. With boots, you end up cutting out the heel. So that's going to be the bottom area. So we get the base of the foot. And then usually we can just get away with cutting down the center line here. So I'll just cut down the middle. And if we go ahead and unfold this, this is going to more than likely unfold into something usable, like that there. Because the nature of this ledge, though, I may consider cutting here and separating those into separate pieces. It'll just kind of give it a nice area to catch on and a little bit less distortion in the normal map, and we could do a quick layout there. So something like that should look nice for our legs. And then moving into the helmet is very similar to the pauldron and other areas, so we'll go ahead and tackle that next. So when it comes to the helmet, if we just unfold this, it's going to be a bit of a mess because everything's attached. We're going to want to separate out any of the pieces that kind of hang out here. For example, the horn, this can be cut into its own piece. I'll just come into the base there and just hit cut. That will go ahead and allow me to cut this out. Now, in terms of the base trim, we might find a reason to separate that, but more than likely it's okay the way it is. We will want to find the center line here and basically just cut down to the base on the underside. Remember, we have the theme of the underside. On the arm, we're going to do the same thing here on the horn, and the idea is to cut it into something that looks a bit like this. And then you can proceed to cut it down the other side to kind of add some relief to it. That way, we're not getting too much stretching here, and it should be okay. So you can see how that's overlapping. That's not ideal. I'll do a cut, move, and sew on that, and then just unfold once more, and that should be good enough for this. We also might find it better to separate it into chunks for the purpose of just having it take up less space. That's something to kind of also be mindful of. If we do come in here and basically just cut it in half, these 2 halves will be easier to fit than this one whole. But once again, going back to that idea of these UV shells, we might find it a little bit harder to fit these in here. The other thing, too, is looking at how the curve goes. It might be better to weld the underside, ironically, for less stretching or more stretching. I don't know how exactly it would go. Welding this underside, though, does make it seem like it takes up a little bit less space. So you do have to play around with it. There's not one right way to do this. There's actually several different ways. So, yeah, pick your poison on that one. I'll just set it like that for now. Now, the head itself, we're basically going to have an inside, an outside, and a trim. So we're going to come along this outermost line here and cut along this. Now, this interior area, we more than likely don't need to put a cut on unless it has a 90-degree edge, which this area might. That's slightly concerning. We won't really know till we bake it. So let's go ahead and cut that. And if we go ahead and unfold now, this will give me an inside-outside setup here. So we have the outside of the helmet, we have the inside of the helmet. And then, like I mentioned, this inner ring, generally speaking, we're going to want to separate out along here. So that way we don't get a whole bunch of stretching going into the outer area. It's kind of just a good practice. And once again, if it's a 90-degree angle, we're going to need a hard edge on it. I don't think ours is, so I think we can get away without that. But you never know. So let's go ahead and unfold that, and we'll get a result that looks a bit like this for our helmet here with the inside and the outside. Like I mentioned, this outer area, you can kind of see how the edges are unfolding, and anywhere you have a 90-degree transition, you do need to make a cut. It's not necessarily going to bake correctly in the texture. Let's experiment with it and see. Unfortunately, it will be a lot of undoing if it does not work out, but if it does, then we're going to get a really nice result. So this is going to lay out our base UVs for this guy, and what we're going to have now is all the individual segments. We can lay these out together with the 3D ratios on, and we have UVs. Now, these UVs are not great in the regards that they need to be kind of optimized for layout, and our layout needs to be, you know, spaced correctly. So we're going to go through each of these pieces now and basically correct them for what we need, but this will be kind of the base cuts to begin with. So make sure you save this out as a new file. I've saved this out as a new layout with UV in its name, and we'll be able to access that easily now. All right, but that's going to give us kind of our base chunks for each of these. Our goal now is to refine these into a really nice, easy to use, optimized layout, do a quick test bake to make sure it's all working, and then if everything looks good, we're going to move into the texturing process. So let's go ahead and just lay these out a little bit better next. Be sure to like and subscribe so you can catch the next video in the series when it goes live.